Welcome to the program of the future of Israel and the Jewish people. I am B.J. Harvey, your host, and I welcome you today. With our guest is Reverend Richard Williams. Richard, thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And in it, the reason why we had Richard here is because we've been friends for about 6 years. And in 6 years, we don't know one another, except to say good morning, good night, and how are you? Did you have a nice day? So I invited Reverend to tell us all about himself and tell us all about Reverend Williams. So with that, Richard, you're all to yourself. You have the whole
It's a
camera.
real pleasure, and thank you for the invitation. You know, I think for such a time as this, in just terms of our journeys, it's in this space that God has allowed our paths to cross. And yes, you know, I was busy, you were busy counseling the students, so we would just kind of pass in the night, greeting one another. But then we had our little moments of having our sessions together. You were there for me in some spaces when I was challenged, and you gave me some great direction. So it's been the 6 years have been great. But as far as who I am, well, I'm 61 years old, so I'm going to try to put that 61 years in this little time we have together. I'm originally from Annapolis, Maryland. I'm a native of Maryland, born and raised in Annapolis. I am one of the youngest of 13 children.
Wow,
Yeah.
I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
and I say one of the youngest because I happen to have an identical twin. So I'm older than he. So he's
By how
technically-
many minutes?
By 4 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, you're the
Yeah,
old
it was
man.
real quick. My mom was a real trooper. So we were born 4 minutes apart. But he's technically the youngest of the clan, of the siblings, because I'm older than him. His name is Robert, and a shout out to him while I'm speaking about him. But I come from a loving family, again in Annapolis, a nice little town by the Chesapeake Bay. The Naval Academy was my playground as a kid. I lived just miles from the United States Naval Academy. Had a really good upbringing. My parents were tremendous. They really loved us. As a matter of fact, my reference point of what love is the love that was shared and demonstrated in my family. My dad was a hard worker. I learned great work ethics from him. He worked a lot. He worked in construction. But I can remember him coming home with his hard hat and his dirty shoes at the door. But just watching him from afar, I learned the importance of work and responsibility. You know, so even growing up, you know, he wasn't the kind of dad that took me out to the backyard and played catch with me and, you know, sat down and taught me finances, that sort of thing. But, you know, he was just a silent teacher. You know, he was responsible, he loved his children, he took care of his family, he went to church. So I watched that from afar. Mom, on the other hand, she was the center of the family. She was the spiritual backbone. As a matter of fact, just to give you a reference point of what the type of person my mother was.
I'm waiting for this.
Yes. So in the African American culture, you have some women who are given, I call it a title, Big Mama. My mother was a Big Mama.
Big Mama.
Yes. You know, there are all kinds of parodies about Big Mamas. But one of the things that hold true, they have big hearts. They love everyone. Everyone comes to Big Mama, and she's always giving of herself, giving of all she is to help and serve other people. You know, there's an old saying that it takes a village to raise a child, well, it takes a Big Mama to raise a village. And my mama, who was a Big Mama, raised a village.
Wonderful.
So early on, I learned how to serve. I learned the importance of having a heart and compassion for people. You know, there were many times I wake up in the morning and there were strange folk in the house that she's taking in to feed and to give shelter. So from an early age, I learned about giving and serving, and being a part of a community, and being connected to people. Yeah, so those were my parents, and you know, they worked hard to get me and my twin brothers to school. Of all 13, we're the only two that went to secondary education. Yeah. So I went to Maryland University. I graduated in 1981. Go Terps! I majored in general studies and minored in special education, and taught for a couple of years after graduating from college.
And where did you teach?
I taught in Landover, Maryland. Back in the day,
Oh.
they had what you call resource rooms. I don't know if they still have those. I came out of the classroom in 1985. I graduated in 81, taught for 4 years, and came out of the classroom. Got a great job with the D.C. government. A lot of things kind of spiraled out of control after that, but we'll get to that later. But I taught in a resource room for 4 years in Landover, Maryland.
All right, after that, tell us a story about your life. How did you?
Yeah, so, you know, life was, you know, it was the average. It was the average growing up. As I said, I learned what love meant and stood for in the borders of my house. You know, 13 siblings.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hugged my sisters, I hugged my brothers, I'd kiss my brothers on the cheeks. You know, I remember coming home from college. When I was in college, I would bring friends home.
Oh, sure.
And I'd come in and hug my brother, and I'd kiss him on the cheek, and you know, we were just really close. And the friends I would bring home from college, they'd be like, you kiss your brother? You hug your brothers and sisters? I'm like, doesn't everybody do that? So those were normal. That was a normal thing for me. But I'll tell you what the challenge was. So in my house, I was loved. I was the youngest of 13 and a twin, so imagine how special that made me in the household. And I felt all that. I was really special. And they taught me I was special. My father would teach me I could do anything. I just watched him work, and he would push through challenges. You know, but it was the neighboring space around me. You know, I grew up in public housing. And I learned early on, just from the community, that I was one of that my family was part of. This is what I felt, just hearing the talk. That perhaps my family was part of the have-nots. You know, I heard a lot that the Williams boys won't be much. There was a lot of discouragement. You know, we weren't the richest people in the neighborhood. You know, but I never went hungry. There was lots of love. I never went unclothed. There was an abundant appreciation of life in my household. But beyond the doors of my house, it was a pretty challenging community.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and you know, oftentimes it says if you hear something long enough, you'll begin to believe it.
Yes.
So, growing up as a little kid, you know, I remember being teased for wearing the same clothes to school maybe 2 days in a row, that sort of thing. My parents didn't have a big expensive car. You know, so being teased a lot about that. So this challenge of feeling worth anything, you know, I'm hearing one thing from my family, I'm hearing one thing from other people, and you hear that long enough, you start to believe it. So hearing that I wasn't going to be much or amount to much really became a motivating factor for me to be something. So wanting to go to school, that little 10 by 10 block area, that was my whole world growing up. From birth to when I went off to college, I was about 17, 18 years old. And I remember launching out of that space, going a 45-minute drive from Annapolis to College Park, Maryland. Mm-hmm. It was like going to the big city. It was like a whole,
Really?
It was like a whole new world. People talk differently. You know, people dress differently. I probably sounded funny to them. But I was challenged with wanting to be something. wanting to prove everyone wrong who said that I wouldn't be anything. Matter of fact, I remember in high school, back then we had what we call guidance counselors in high school.
Yes, we did.
And you were required to see a guidance counselor. I remember telling her I wanted to go to college, and her remark to me was I wasn't college material. So even that whole thing from the community to the school was resounding in my ear. You weren't going to be anything. You're not going to be anything. You're not going to be anything. And
It's a terrible thing to keep on hearing and be reinforced.
Yeah. So that was a challenge. When I grew up and was able to make my decisions, there was a decision to be something, and it was really to prove everyone wrong. So I guess it was a bittersweet thing, because I was charged with being something. I was motivated to be something, to prove people wrong. I worked hard. I became an overachiever. Maybe for the wrong reasons.
Let me interrupt you for a minute. That's because your parents became your lead rather than the people outside. They were stronger than the outside, and they gave you a better foundation, probably, to achieve what you wanted to achieve.
Well, the thing is, I guess, like again, that old thing, when you hear something long enough, that thing about not being worth anything and not going to accomplish anything in life
wears you down.
Yeah, and then you start to believe it. Even when I got to college, I struggled with self-esteem, being accepted, because I heard the other voices more than I heard from my family.
I see.
I was hearing those voices. I had to, so even though I was achieving, it was never enough. It became this, it took on a life of itself. Nothing was ever good enough.
Wow.
Yeah, so I just kept moving and pushing, and if there were some places, to most accounts, I would have arrived, but that wasn't good enough yet. I had to keep pushing, and that can grow weary and tiresome. But just to move on, so I graduated from college, I taught school, and again, great job. Hearing, how you doing, Mr. Williams, and little kids just honoring you as a teacher, that sort of thing. That was, that could have probably satisfied most people. But again, I wanted more. So I was able to secure a job with the DC government, and that was an amazing job. I started off as the copy clerk, Here I have a college degree, and there was a job opening in the Superior Court of the District of Columbia as a copy clerk. And I took the job. Started off as a grade 5. It was roughly about maybe $17,000 a year.
Well, it was a lot of money at that time.
In 2.5 years, I went from a grade 5 to a grade 13.
Wow.
And this is 1985. So even so, as a 26-year-old young man, I was a grade 13 in the DC government, making lots of money, and feeling real proud. And that's when things began to change. And now that I look back, I saw myself slowly becoming those very people who taunted me and teased me. I bought a nice home in a real nice neighborhood. I had all the amenities of a good life. And, I'm like shaking my finger at all those folk back home. But I started judging people. I became extremely proud, boastful, even arrogant, forgetting all
for achieving what you have
forgetting all those wonderful things that my mom taught me, that Big Mama taught me. All those things just slipped away. And even this desire to be a part of led me into another space that just kind of overcame me. So working for the Superior Court, my new friends were judges, my new friends were attorneys. This was my social network. There was a social register in the area that I was a part of, getting invitations to the right party and being able to buy the right clothes. All of that was my new world. It was all about material, status, being important. So there were quite a few attorneys I hung out with. And I remember going to a party. This is the first time I ever used drugs. I went to a party, and my two friends I'd gone with, they were there snorting cocaine. And, little old Richard, the guy who wasn't going to be anything, I'm like, well, I really made it. This is what we do, right? And I joined them. And nothing happened, of course. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect. But that just carried on. And before you know it, that whole thing just took me to another space. Just to forward wind, 23 years later, I was in a space of deep, deep addiction to crack.
Wow.
In that process, I lost a home, all those things that were, that became important to me. Yeah, it was a really bad space.
How long did this space last?
23 years. From the time I first started to the time I came to Pivot Ministries. I was a student of Pivot Ministries. 12 years ago, I came to Pivot as a student. My life was totally unmanageable. And again, arrogance, just not being focused. The drugs really just caught hold of me and took me into a deep place. So you reach a place of hopelessness and despair. You become invisible. I burned a lot of bridges with my family. From my perspective, they stopped loving me. They weren't the family that I grew up with that hugged me and kissed me and told me I was special. And I'm thinking they changed. But I was
changed.
Yes, yeah.
Not you.
That was again, yeah. I mean, now 12 years later, I can see that that's what the drugs changes your whole perspective. But Pivot was a lifesaver.
How long did you stay at Pivot?
Well, I came in as a student in 2007, and 2008 I completed. And again, that drive, that motivation, there was a real spiritual awakening at Pivot. It's a spiritual recovery program, and it approaches addiction as a spiritual problem. So it seeks to heal the soul.
And you were there for how long? 1 year?
My studentship was 1 year.
1 year.
Actually, 16 months.
Oh.
Yeah, I was a student for 16 months.
Then at the time they had Team Challenge.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. We were connected with Pivot's connected with Teen Challenge.
At that time.
Yeah. So there was a partnership where you were in Pivot for 6 months and then you go to Teen Challenge for 10 months. Mm-hmm. So I completed that whole program.
Wonderful.
Yeah. But it was in that process that something happened. There was just a spiritual awakening in terms of who I was, who God says I am, my identity in Christ Jesus. It just brought me back to some roots that Big Mama taught me, and that Jake, my dad's name. It brought me back to some roots, some basic fundamental Christian roots that they imparted to me as I was growing up. I abandoned all of those teachings on this quest for the best, on this quest for success, on this quest for material championship.
To begin with, when we first met, which was 2005, I think, and in that, no, it was later than that we first met.
We met in
6 years ago, so it had to be, okay.
2013, 2013.
When we met, you already spent, I'm not good in math, but 6
I'd
years.
been there 2013, 2007. I'd been there 6 years.
6
already.
years, right.
Yep.
And in the 6 years, I see that you grew from being a student to becoming the CEO of this establishment and taking care of up to so many people, and seeing that it works because it worked for you. How wonderful it would be if you were the leader and you had to say so, the leadership to God, and God blessed you to bless these people and say, I want to be like him.
Well, addiction is a real difficult thing. It's difficult to break. If I could have done it on my own, it wouldn't have lasted 23 years.
Mm-hmm.
I would have come out of it long. I remember moments I wanted to stop and couldn't, but it wasn't until I came to Pivot when you sort of change operating systems, and you start to operate in obedience to God's word. You start to walk in an identity that God says you have. So, knowing the challenge, knowing the journey, I know it's possible. I've done it at this point. And I know guys that come in through the door, I've been in that space, and I'm there to encourage them and let them know that it's possible. You can do this, and we're here to help you. I was asked a question recently, what was it that brought me to a point of freedom from drugs and pointing me in the direction of drawing in close to God? And it was the moment I really realized how important it was to operate in obedience. Learning to operate within structures, learning to operate under authority. I'd become so arrogant and just in my own self-absorbed. I ran across my journal that I started 12 years ago at Pivot Ministries, and September the 7th, 2017 was the journal entry, and here I was addicted to drugs for all these years, came in broken, just a mess, hopeless, no future, no hope whatsoever. And the next morning I wrote, the first line in my journal is, I arrived at Pivot Ministries at 12:15 in the morning. The building didn't impress me at all. It just goes to show my mindset. Here I'm looking at the building and, from the outside you think it wasn't much going on in the inside. Again, I'm judging everything on looks and appearance. That was 12 years ago. But just as God does now, He looks at the inside and not the out. I've come to a place now where God has drawn me to be a light to men, to be an example, to be encouragement to men coming through this journey of addiction. It's a powerful thing, and it's difficult to break the chains of it without Christ being in the center of it all.
Well, you see, I'm glad we had this talk today, because based upon what you said, you've become an inspiration to others that see you, because you're so human. You're not necessarily the boss, but you went through all of these things that the rest of the guys are going through.
Yeah.
And therefore you become, from what you were to what is, you are now the leader of all of these people.
I'm now the leader.
And you become the billboard of other people to come and say, if the pastor could do what he did and come through it and become the pastor, that would absolutely give me the same kind of inspiration that you had from way back when. Your mother and father gave you that inspiration, that you were special.
Yeah.
And it disappeared for a while, but it came right back when you wanted to do better and better and better. Even in the ministry, you had to achieve what you had to achieve to become what you wanted. And what you wanted was the light to shine from you to everybody else that comes into this establishment.
Absolutely.
And for that, I thank you for being my friend. I thank you for giving me the invitation to do what I do within the establishment.
Amen.
And allowing me the privilege of doing it.
Well, thank you for being available, and thank you for your heart to serve. One of the biggest things in terms of where I am now, that whole idea of being special, I know now that I am special, but I'm special because God sees me as special. I'm special in God's eyes. My misconception was I was special because of man. I had to be special by man's standards, but I'm special by God's standards.
Well,
What a difference.
you have been special to me
Oh,
as a
thank you.
friend. I hope and I pray that you're special to those guys who show up within the confines of your establishment. And now there's 3 buildings
Yeah.
and other things. And the next time we get together on set, I would like to go through the programs that you have.
I would love to do
instilled.
that. I would love to share with what pivots, how we do it, the whole theory of change, and just being drawn into a space of selflessness, and it's a heart change.
Yes, it
You know,
is.
the Spirit of God can accomplish.
Well, I see what it accomplished in my friend.
Yeah.
I see what it has accomplished in the direction that you're going with. I see you're the guy that I see used as a quartermaster in the Navy. You steer this ship. You watch how this goes, and you steer it the way God will allow you the privilege of achieving what you want to achieve, as long as He comes first.
Amen.
And I see that all the time when you have your meetings, your personal meetings with your men. And I see that all the time when you come into the meeting rooms. And I see how they look at you. I can see how they respect you. You can have a certain era. Like you and I had one conversation. You don't have to have them stand up. As soon as they get in,
Yeah, I remember
you
that
can
conversation.
Feel, right? You can feel how much they
Yeah.
respect you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have to put on my epaulets
Yeah.
to do that. And I bend it to your will. I bend it to your analysis. I bend it to your choice. You are right. And in that, I see we got a cue to close.
Okay.
So this program is going to be over shortly.
All right.
And again, I thank you for sharing. And next time we have that ability, we will share the program
We'd love to do it.
or programs that you
Yes,
have.
we'd love to do it.
So therefore, I thank you for listening. I thank you for enjoying the choir that was here on a prior set. And I thank you, Lord, for everything that you have blessed Pastor Williams with. And so I wish you shalom, my friends. I'll see you next week.
Shalom.
Shalom.